Welcome back. This will be my second Great Comeback Albums video. And real quick before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank all the people who are appearing on your screen right now, the folks who have donated financially to the channel. My sincere apologies to anyone that I left out. It was difficult to track everyone down through the various platforms I have, but you know who you are. And again, thank you so much. I can't tell you how great it is to know that some people are out there appreciating what I do. And if you'd like to add your name to the list, you can do donations at Buy Me a Coffee. There you can do a one-time donation, or I've had a couple of people set up regular monthly donations, which is very cool. We've also got Venmo, PayPal, and Zelle. Details for all of those in the description of the video. Thanks so much. Let's do it. Shadows of another day. If you hear me talking on the wind, you got to understand that we must remain perfect strangers. I love that one. That, of course, the title track from Deep Purple's 11th studio album, Perfect Strangers, which hit the rock scene like a bolt of lightning back in 1984. This was the first we had heard from Deep Purple in 9 years, and even then, the previous record was a completely different group, what's known as the Mark IV lineup. David Coverdale on vocals, Tommy Bolin on guitar. Cool in its own way, but not classic Deep Purple in my book. You had to go all the way back to 1973's Who Do We Think We Are to find a Purple album featuring the Mark II lineup, which in my mind is Deep Purple as nature intended. We're talking Ian Gillan on vocals, Ritchie Blackmore on guitar, Roger Glover on bass, John Lord on keyboards, and Ian Pace on the drums. Now, it seems that any band associated with Ritchie Blackmore tends to be a revolving door of band personnel coming in and out. But this reminds me of a little trivia question. There is one Deep Purple member who has appeared on every single Deep Purple album. Take a moment and see if you can think who it might be. And the answer is Ian Pace. Did you get it? You can whip that one out at social gatherings and make yourself the life of the party, or maybe not. It's hard to overstate what a huge comeback this album was. It was only the second Deep Purple album after Machine Head to reach platinum status. It hit number 5 in the UK, number 17 on the Billboard 200, and all the more incredible when you think about how much the hard rock scene had changed in the 11 years since Who Do We Think We Are. Hair metal was in full swing in 1984, and here come these older British guys looking the same and more or less playing the same type of music they were doing back in the early 70s, and everyone went for it, including a lot of the young kids. When the band went out on tour to support the record, demand was so strong they had to book numerous additional dates to keep up, which supports the idea that the group themselves had not expected such a warm reception on their return. Here's a stat that blows my mind. The 1985 Deep Purple tour outgrossed every other act who went out on the road that year, with the exception of Bruce Springsteen. That is mind-boggling. And I'm happy to say I caught the band on that tour at the Cow Palace near San Francisco, California. And it was a great show. And it's funny the things you remember. Lead vocalist Ian Gillan, of course, up to that point, was always known for that massive curtain of hair that he had. In fact, he's still got it on the picture on the back album cover of Perfect Strangers. Well, he obviously had cut off the majority of it somewhere, I guess, in between the album and the tour. So when he walked out on stage with his new look, I was wondering for a few seconds if he had been replaced. So clearly Perfect Strangers was a massive hit that defied all reasonable expectations. So the question must be asked, what makes this album so great? Well, there's a number of things, but I would have to argue that Ritchie Blackmore's guitar playing is a huge element here. Or maybe I'm a bit biased because he's always been one of my favorite rock guitar players. Now, I remember reading interviews with Blackmore back in the 70s, and he was always going on about the importance of spontaneity in his playing. The term he used over and over was that he didn't want his solos to sound overly clinical. And as great as the early Deep Purple was, some of those solos, even on classic albums like In Rock and Machine Head, maybe they do come across a little bit clinical, maybe a bit over-rehearsed. But on this album, that is absolutely not the case. These solos have the feel of a guy plugging a Strat straight into a Marshall and letting rip. The opening track, Knocking at Your Back Door, might very well be my favorite Deep Purple tune of all time and contains what is probably my favorite rock guitar solo of all time, not just from Ritchie, but from anyone. The best way I can describe it, it just sounds savage and pissed off. It's got an almost sloppy style, but brilliantly so, the way he pops in these seemingly random open strings, the use of the whammy bar. At times it sounds like Ritchie is reaching for notes that you can't find on a guitar, but he's going to go for them anyway. Incredible stuff there, just absolutely primal guitar playing. Now, Ian Gillan is also in fine form on this record. Okay, maybe not quite as acrobatic as he was in his youth on things like Child in Time, but he sounds great here. I love his performance on the title track, and on a song like Hungry Days, he shows that he's still got a little bit of his old scream left. That's a great album track with some great lyrics. It's sort of a tribute to the old hippie years with some great lines from Gillan. Tuning up to madness in the back room, candles burning, present the stinking hippie, and throw the naked thunder to the crowd. I also love it when songwriters pay tribute to their past work. We get the line, "We all came out to Montreux, but that's another song." Very clever. Gillan is just on fire lyrically on this record. And finally, I want to elaborate on something I touched on earlier regarding this album's success. I think it's brilliant that they more or less stuck to their guns, didn't change their sound much at all, although they did do a few slight updates, mainly in production. Keyboardist John Lord mainly stuck to his old Hammond C3 sound, played through a Marshall for what he called the beast tone. He did update with a few more modern keyboards, just a touch, but the vast majority of it is the old John Lord sound. And thank God for that. Thank God they didn't go and use a bunch of cheesy mid-80s sounding keyboard tones for this record. It would have been a disaster. Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. Tell me lies, tell me lies. Oh no, no, you can't disguise. way back in 1987, Tango in the Night remains the final studio album ever to be released by Fleetwood Mac's most commercially successful lineup, the lineup that most people today think of as being Fleetwood Mac. I'm talking, of course, about Mick Fleetwood, John McVie, Christine McVie, Lindsey Buckingham, and Stevie Nicks. Now, of course, those five reunited again in 1997 for the live album and film The Dance. Brilliant live album, by the way, but of course no new material there. And sadly, any hope of a reunion of these five was dashed back in 2022 with the sad death of Christine McVie. While the gap separating this album from its predecessor was nothing like the 11-year chasm between Deep Purple Mark II albums we discussed, it was considerable. 5 years separated Tango in the Night from Mirage, which came out in 1982. And as with Deep Purple, the pop music climate had changed considerably in those years. It changes quickly all the time. So it really wasn't a sure bet that this new offering from Fleetwood Mac, kind of a dinosaur from the 70s at that point, would be successful. But obviously, Tango in the Night turned out to be a smash hit. It's racked up sales of over 15 million worldwide, easily the group's second best-selling album after Rumors, and there was no way you were ever going to top Rumors. That was one of those once-in-a-lifetime events that you just can't recreate. The album produced 4 top 20 singles: Big Love, 7 Wonders, Little Lies, and Everywhere. And you know, just thinking about those 4 singles there just makes me want to get on my soapbox for a minute and sing the praises of Christine McVie. I've always thought she was sort of an unsung hero of this band, a real workhorse, you might say. It seems like Stevie Nicks was always getting so much attention. She was kind of the sex symbol. People were always talking about the drama between Stevie and Lindsey. Of course, Mick Fleetwood and John McVie always got cred for being original members of the band. And then there was Christine just churning out one pop masterpiece after another very quietly. Now, I certainly can't speak authoritatively on this, but it sure seems to me that Lindsey Buckingham was a very forceful personality within Fleetwood Mac, who generally seemed to get his way. Just look at the release dates of the singles from Rumors on. On Rumors, Lindsey's Go Your Own Way was the first single, certainly a great song and very deserving. Then Stevie got Dreams, and finally Christine got a single. Then take the next album, Tusk. Once again, Lindsey's was the first single, the title track. Then Stevie got Sarah, and finally Christine got one. It seems to be kind of a pattern. Granted, the pattern was briefly broken on Mirage. Christine did get the first single there with Hold Me. But on Tango in the Night, it was Lindsey once again to be the first out the gate with Big Love. Then Stevie got her single, 7 Wonders. I'm not sure what they were thinking there. I've never found that to be one of Stevie's stronger songs. It was the worst performing single of the 4 from this album. And then finally, Christine got a couple, Little Lies and Everywhere. And it's funny, those 2 songs have turned out to be the biggest hits from this album all these years later. Anyway, be that as it may, there's some great stuff on this record. It opens with Lindsey's Big Love, which is great here, but I think even better after he reimagined it on the Dance album in 1997. Something about that live solo acoustic version. The vocals are much more intense and impassioned, and it's got that flashy Lindsey Buckingham finger picking in the tradition of things like World Turning and Never Going Back Again. Looking out for love in the night so still. Good as as it is, an interesting element to this album, in my opinion, is the relative absence of Stevie Nicks as a real driving force. Now, she did contribute 3 songs to the record, which is pretty typical, but she was usually good for one massive blockbuster on just about every album, right? Whether it was Rhiannon, Dreams, Sarah, Gypsy, right? I think you get my point. She didn't really have a big hit on this one, and I'm sure this was mainly due to her substance abuse issues. She had checked herself into the Betty Ford Clinic in late 1986, just before this album was made. And while she succeeded in kicking the cocaine, a psychiatrist then prescribed a sedative called Klonopin to help her maintain her sobriety, which resulted in what Stevie described as an 8-year zombie-like state. She basically became addicted to that. She said it was maybe even worse than the cocaine addiction. Incidentally, one of her tracks on the Tango in the Night album, Welcome to the Room, Sarah, was written during her stay at Betty Ford. And then there's Christine. As I alluded to earlier, I think she contributed a couple of gems to this one with Little Lies and Everywhere. Now, some hardcore old school Fleetwood Mac fans might have thought these were a bit too light, a bit too poppy, but I disagree. I think they're really well written and thoroughly enjoyable. Classic Christine McVie, but with a few little production tweaks that gave the band a bit more of an 80s sound. Something I found really interesting, the album's engineer, Greg Droman, said that some of the parts were recorded at half speed and then sped up. That's something the Beatles did on occasion. He says this gives the music a sort of light, airy sound. The harmonics get shifted up and produce a kind of tinkly high end that's very distinctive. Now, I don't know for sure, but I would not be surprised if Little Lies and Everywhere both benefited from this technique. All in all, while I don't think this record comes close to the sublime level of Rumors, I mean, come on, how many albums ever will? Tango in the Night was a very strong release that absolutely deserves to be discussed in any conversation of great rock/pop comeback albums. And as mentioned before, being the final release from this classic lineup of Fleetwood Mac, I think it stands as a great epitaph that the group can be very proud of. It just occurred to me it would have been difficult to have picked 3 more diverse bands for this video. It wasn't intentional. I guess my tastes are just all over the map. We started with Deep Purple, hard rock icons, arguably the inventors of heavy metal, depending on who you talk to. Then we had Fleetwood Mac, started in the late 60s as a British blues rock band, and then became a pop juggernaut in the 1970s. And now the Grateful Dead and whatever that band was, I guess the original jam band. 7 years separated in the dark from the Dead's previous album, Go to Heaven, released in 1980. That album had been pretty universally panned, not only by critics, but by many Deadheads and even the group itself, although history has been a bit kinder to the album. Tunes like Althea became concert staples. That song was once rated in the top 5 of best Dead songs of all time. It sounds funny to say, but I don't think the cover of this record did it any favors. It features a pretty hilarious photo of the band wearing matching white disco suits, standing in front of an all-white background. Now, if they were trying to cash in on the disco craze, they were a bit late. That was already well on the way out by 1980. The band have expressed huge regrets over that cover. Go to Heaven was also the first Dead album to feature Brett Midland on keyboards, and that was also a source of some controversy. Some Deadheads felt his stuff was maybe a bit too yacht rock, kind of in the style of Michael McDonald. And I really do think that and the cover conspired to create this idea that maybe the band had sold out. So all of this served as the backdrop to In the Dark's release in 1987. And then something incredible happened. The album inexplicably became a huge hit. It reached number 6 on the Billboard 200, the group's only top 10 album in its entire career. The single Touch of Grey hit number 9. That was the only Dead single to even crack the top 40. It's hilarious when you think about it. By that measure, you could call the Grateful Dead a one-hit wonder. Now, granted, that's ridiculous because the group's success was never about hit singles, but it is kind of funny to think about. All of a sudden, it became cool to be a Deadhead, even among the younger crowd. I was about 3 years out of high school around this time, working my way through college. And yeah, I knew plenty of people my age who started wearing tie-dye shirts, going to Dead shows, hallucinogenics, the whole 9 yards. I guess it kind of makes sense. Think about it. At that point, we were exactly 20 years out from the Summer of Love. And I think 2 decades is pretty much about the time lapse where nostalgia starts to set in. But of course, nostalgia alone wouldn't have been enough. None of this would have mattered if the music wasn't good. But it turns out the music was very good. I honestly think In the Dark stands up quite well next to a lot of the Dead's best work. The single Touch of Grey is just a beautiful song. Few tunes can brighten my mood as quickly as this one. Just when I hear those opening strains, I never miss an opportunity to sing the praises of Dead lyricist Robert Hunter, and I think Touch of Grey is one of his best. That opening verse gets me every single time.
It must be getting early, clocks are running late, paint by the morning sky, it looks so phony, dawn is breaking everywhere, not a candle curse the glare, draw the curtains, I don't care, 'cause it's alright.
The tune is such a great comment on the group's acceptance of its status as scarred, grizzled old rock veterans. That final line, "Oh well, a touch of gray, kinda suits you anyway." That was all I had to say, and it's all right. I will get by, I will survive. Jerry's playing is great as always. He had such an interesting style. That clear ringing tone, a very soft touch compared to most rock players, that very fluid chromaticism. He had so many influences, bluegrass, country, rock, but to me, he seems to think like a jazz player. You can tell he's playing with the changes, unlike most rock guys who just sit in a pentatonic scale and regurgitate the usual licks. Bob Weir gives us one of his best tunes with Hell in a Bucket. I may be going to hell in a bucket, but at least I'm enjoying the ride. Now, that line became much more meaningful just a few weeks ago with the sad death of Bob Weir, but I do think it's safe to say that he enjoyed the ride, which in the end I think is what really matters. And I want to take a moment to discuss how this album was conceived and recorded, because I think that's a major factor in its success. The material on Made in Heaven was freshly written when it was recorded back in 1980. The material on In the Dark had been around since the early 80s, and the group had been playing most of these songs live. It's common knowledge that the Grateful Dead lived for the stage. The albums were really just kind of an afterthought. So I think the fact that these tunes were worked and reworked on stage for several years before they were finally put on vinyl is huge. And check this out. When it came time to actually record, the band rented an ornate old theater called the Marin Veterans Memorial Auditorium in San Rafael, California, and recorded the vast majority of the tracks there live on the stage. No audience, but in a darkened auditorium with full stage lighting. I thought that was a brilliant idea. Just create to the greatest extent possible the feeling of a live atmosphere. And it absolutely paid off. This album was a triumph for the Grateful Dead in every sense of the word.